today's challenges requires creative problem solving and that we leverage all the resources at our disposal. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda remains as relevant today as it was in 2015. Achieving our shared vision of a long-term sustainable development requires that we mobilize financing from all sources, including the three streams of capital for sustainable development: private investment, domestic resource mobilization, and foreign assistance. The United States has been leading comprehensive efforts to evolve the multilateral development banks to address global challenges with sufficient speed and scale. Working together with a broad coalition, we have made significant progress. We have pushed for implementation of the G20 MDB Capital Adequacy Framework Review recommendations that, along with capital increases recently agreed at the EBRD and Inter-American Investment Corporation, and the callable capital increases at the African Development Bank, will enable $250 million in additional MDB financing over the next decade, including $50 billion in additional lending capacity at the World Bank alone. The United States continues to demonstrate leadership in enhancing responsiveness of the international financial system elsewhere, including by promoting an increase in the use of climate-resilient debt clauses, receiving authorization to lend $21 billion to support low-income countries through concessional financing through the IMF's Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, advocating for an additional IMF executive board seat for Africa, and supporting voluntary rechanneling of SDRs. While pushing for the system to deliver greater impact, we continue to underscore, respect, and support the independent mandates, governance structures, and decision-making processes of the MDBs, the IFIs, and the OECD. This independence is vital to keeping these institutions fiscally solvent and able to support the development objectives of their borrowing members over the long term. The United States is proud to be the largest provider of official development assistance, and we continue to build on our long-standing investments in fundamentals, including health, food, education, infrastructure, energy. However, ODA must be accompanied by efforts to mobilize additional domestic public resources, strengthen domestic policy and regulatory environments, and attract more private investment at home and from abroad. We reiterate the principle that each country retains primary responsibility for its sustainable development. We must support investment policies that promote good governance, anti-corruption efforts, international labor practices, and environmental sustainability, and transparency, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. We must continue to work together to find solutions to help countries address the constraints that heightened debt vulnerabilities place on their ability to invest in the future, and identify ways science, technology, innovation, and data can contribute to mobilizing means of implementation. We look forward to working with you together on FFD4. Thank you very much.
The Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia and the United Nations for jointly organizing this meeting. Malta aligns itself with the EU statement. 9 years after the international community gathered in Ethiopia to adopt the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the SDG financing gap remains substantial. While we are committed to addressing the financing gap, the international geopolitical situation, from Russia's illegal war of aggression to the situation in the Red Sea and beyond, has further deteriorated the global economic situation, with an outsized impact on the poorest and most vulnerable. Difficult progress on the 2030 agenda is also jeopardized by inflation, slow growth, supply chain and production disruptions, global food insecurity, and debt unsustainability. The climate crisis further increases inequality across countries and societies, including island states. To strengthen resilience, we support a long-term, green, just, and digital transition. We recognize that events in recent years have had a drastic effect on all sources of financing for sustainable development, with the most vulnerable among the hardest hit, and for too many countries, debt levels have become unsustainable. As we prepare for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, we must agree on short, medium-term, and long-term solutions to effectively address these crises. As a member of the European Union, we are proud of the leadership that the EU has shown in promoting a global, green, inclusive, and resilient recovery. Through the Global Gateway, and together with international development finance institutions, we are committed to promote efforts to develop strategic projects with transformative impact in infrastructure, promoting a values-based and human-centric development model. Public finance is essential, but it will not be enough. Clearly, we need to do much more collectively to channel and catalyse both public and private finance to where it is most needed. We must align capital flows with the SDGs and prioritise climate-resilient development. And we must also combat tax evasion, illicit financial flows and corruption in order to manage and use available public resources more efficiently. Malta is committed to providing political, practical and financial support to these efforts, and we are also committed to using our own overseas development assistance to target the SDGs, with particular reference to Goal 4 on ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education, promoting lifelong education opportunities for all. In closing, I would like to underline Malta's support for developing countries to have access to public, concessional and private finance towards investments aligned with the objectives of
Excellencies, colleagues, Ireland aligns with the EU statement, and we would like to offer some further remarks given our commitment to advancing the Financing for Development agenda. I would like to start by thanking the organisers of this meeting. In particular, I would like to thank the Government of Ethiopia for their hospitality in hosting this process. As we gather this week to prepare for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, the stakes are high. In the current context, when progress on many SDG targets is slow or stagnant, and there are multiple and interlocking global crises, it is imperative that we act urgently to deliver on all of the SDGs. Financing is essential to do so. Ireland is firmly committed to the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Financing for Development is central to the 2030 Agenda and the realisation of all the SDGs and targets. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda was intended to provide the engine for SDG implementation, but it is running on empty. FFD4 is an opportunity to address this. We need to make real progress to address financing gaps and ensure accessible, inclusive and meaningful financing for development. The outcome of this conference will have a lifetime beyond 2030. As such, we need to ensure that it builds on our existing commitments and sets an ambitious agenda with everyone's buy-in. To do this, we reiterate our hopes for an inclusive, open and transparent process. It is imperative to ensure the meaningful participation of civil society in particular. Civil society space is shrinking around the world. Civil society actors are key development partners, and we need to gain their insight and input throughout this process. To conclude, Ireland is looking forward to engaging in this session. You can count on Ireland's support and constructive engagement throughout this process. Thank you.
I join the rest of the distinguished delegates in congratulating you for convening this first session of the Preparatory Committee for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. We see this process as crucial in setting the stage to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and ensure sustained development beyond 2030. Almost 10 years post the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, it is clear that we have a long way to go towards attaining the SDGs. The progress made, at less than 20%, remains undesirable, and the financing gap of $4 trillion remains high. This calls for introspection, decisiveness, and commitment to action by all partners. Chairperson, early this year, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, declared the severe drought being experienced in the country a national disaster and emergency, which has impacted over 6 million families. With climate change and the El Niño phenomenon exacerbating the crisis, our food security, water, and energy supplies are under severe threat. Compounding these challenges are significant fiscal constraints faced by the country due to the country's heavy debt burden and a high risk of further indebtedness. This overwhelming debt and vulnerability to unforeseen shocks have seriously undermined our growth prospects and our ability to invest in sustainable development. Financing deficits have increased due to the accumulated effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, geopolitical conflicts, and other financial conditions that we have experienced. Urgent measures are required to accelerate the recovery of the gains we have lost. The challenges I have highlighted, which are not unique to Zambia, underscore the need for the present global financial framework to be responsive to not only the present, but also the emerging developmental challenges. The current international financial architecture must be reformed to, among others, ensure affordable financing at scale, provide swifter resolution of debt, and provide for a robust universal international framework on tax matters. The international financial system must be inclusive and enhance the voices of the Global South, notably Africa.
Therefore, this session sets the stage by reforming our financial strategies for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which will also, in turn, sabotage implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Vice Chair, countries in special situations like Lesotho are still reeling from the adverse impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, effects of climate change, debt challenges, and the similarly prevalent geopolitical tensions, which have all affected their trajectory and in achieving their sustainable development goals. Alarmingly, the Kingdom of Lesotho's efforts to mobilize resources for the implementation of its agenda or its development frameworks is hampered by the decline in foreign direct investment, the official development assistance, which continues to be an important source for Lesotho's budget. The Financing for Development Report 2024 reveals that despite efforts to advance development financing across the action areas of the Financing for Development agenda over the past 2 decades, developing countries are today faced with large unmet financial needs and a financial architecture unable to close gaps in an even ever more crisis-prone world. Towards this end, the Kingdom of Lesotho would like to echo the following proposals to address financial challenges of developing countries and for acceleration of the implementation of SDGs. Firstly, reports reveal that in the sub-Saharan Africa region, debt servicing consumed nearly half of all government revenue in 2023. Therefore, with these severe fiscal challenges arising from rising debt, some of the measures that could be explored could include, inter alia, promotion of debt sustainability and exploring debt relief. Secondly, scaled-up efforts are needed for FDI, as it has substantially decelerated since the 3rd International Conference on Financing for Development in 2015. Thirdly, we call on the reform of the international finance architecture and multilateral development governance reform to be fit for purpose and to add the voice of developing countries in their decision-making. Fourth, as financing is fuel of development, we underscore the importance of scaling up concessional financing resources in order to meet SDG financing needs. Fifth, support in domestic resource mobilization is greatly needed in vulnerable countries like Lesotho.